and I got a download. I really couldn't, it was just too much information for me to try to do a little stop in time to look at the picture. But when we were recently going over this information for the graphic novel, I remembered not really in the middle of all of this, but kind of back, was a very tall being in a similar suit we were in. And I could just see this part of their eyes, but between the top of their lip and their forehead. And they had very large, pale blue eyes, and their skin was alabaster white. Interesting. I think some of the work that I'm doing with Gonzalez with my memory and trying to fix some of the neurological issues, I'm starting to trigger information that for some reason they didn't want me to have. It was beautiful. They were beautiful. And, we were told that these crystals they had a life force to them. And basically when we interfaced with them, we connected with them and were downloading information like a USB drive. And later the information was, I guess, downloaded out of us. Of course, as protocol, at the end, we were all debriefed as a part of them also removing the data from us, and then we were blank slated and sent back up to the surface, where we soon got into a white van, were driven to school, and then our parents picked us up. And we were usually given a memory of going on a field trip to a museum or to see a show or something like that. The screen memories seem to fade away very quickly for me, and about 3 to 5% of the people. For some reason, about 3 to 5% of the people they use these technologies on, they're just unsuccessful, at least for very long. The way I've explained it is that, how do we have memories from past lives? Our physical brains were not there to record the information. Well, obviously, we have since I was in the IT field, we have a physical hard drive and we have a virtual hard drive. And everything we experience now and in other lives are backed up to that virtual hard drive. This physical hard drive can be messed with. It can be reformatted, it can be reprogrammed, but the information that is up in the cloud, I guess you would say, can't be. And if they remove information from your physical hard drive, there seems 3 to 5% of the intuitive empaths, there seems to be a automatic download or type of thing that occurs where the information starts coming back and they're unable to erase the information permanently. This is the first time I went down to the Anshar area down in the inner earth. I was brought down. There was a bright flash. I wasn't expecting it. I was laying down, and all of a sudden I find myself, I'm laying down on a floor in a completely different environment. All of a sudden it's cooler. I can smell and kind of taste minerals. I hear kind of echoey type of sounds. I was not where I was when I went to sleep. And I was in the middle of this room, and I saw people guarding doorways kind of off in the distance. And at that point, Hari, Gonzalez, and a small delegation approached me. And I was still pretty nervous. They then brought me to this cleansing room, which was close by. And it was, because we were on holy ground, I guess you would say, we had to remove the clothing we were wearing and cleanse ourselves in this pool. And, for them, it was not that big of a deal. But I was probably about 60 pounds heavier, and all these people looked like vegans. So first off, I wasn't real excited about taking my clothes off. And Gonzalez wasn't making it any easier. I was kind of trying to hide the best I could, and Hari comes walking up with towels and the tunic thing that I was supposed to wear, the robe. And as she was walking up, I was kind of using him in between us to block. And he saw what I was doing, and he got a real devious smile on his face, and he took one giant step back. So she gave me the robe and the little towels and left, or stepped back away, and then I was guided through doing the embarrassing cleansing ceremony. Once I had the robe on and I kind of shrugged off that experience, we headed towards the actual meeting. And I didn't even know that it was really going to be this big of a meeting, but this unprecedented meeting between the 7 different groups. And above the doorway in the main room, they had Vesica Pisces symbols above each doorway. And the little hole in the middle, it looked like you could stick a dowel piece of wood in there. It looked like it held something. One of the symbols I saw a few times was there was a large gold star, and next to it a smaller red star, both of them with 8 points. And it ended up being on the main table when I walked in for this meeting. And they had this is very accurate, by the way, the placement of it all. And this is when they started really speaking this pre-Akkadian language. And that's when they started also discussing what a threat our scalar weaponry had become to them, and how we were basically seeing all these underground bases weren't doing the intelligence to find out whose they were, and when we were attacking them, we weren't distinguishing between them. We were just, oh, there's one, hit it. And it was causing them a lot of problems. When I was taken to see the city, that's when I was blown away. I walk out of this area, and it's like when you walk up to a building for the first time and you find yourself looking straight up. It's the perspective is so quickly changed on you. It was like being on a different planet. There were some of these natural pillars that were in between the ceiling and the floor. Remember how big these pillars would have to be. You could fit Texas inside of this cavern. And there were lights, windows and lights, and looked like balconies all up and down this giant pillar. There were all of these craft that were flying around overhead as well, and they were just disappearing into the side of a wall as if they were just dematerializing and passing straight through. And they had egg-shaped craft, cigar-shaped craft, and irregular flying saucer type craft that were flying, and it looked like kind of like a highway. What was interesting were the giant buildings that just like domes of light. I didn't get close enough to see what they were, but they were very large, about the size of like a football stadium. They were very large. Later, I got to see this very similar type of scene. I was flown in one of the egg-shaped craft over the city and through the wall on a recent expedition. Well, what do the Anshar eat? They're definitely not carnivores. They very much into eating vegetables and fruit that are grown in a certain way, a very high vibratory way. It's interesting how important that is to them, having high vibratory food. When Thierry told me that was a very important part of this journey that most of us leave off. We'll work on the somewhat on the physical part, but we'll work on the spiritual part. We don't realize that we hit a glass ceiling until we can get our physical bodies on the right vibration for what we're putting in it. This was a huge area. I mean, these crops were enough I mean, they could feed millions of people. We were taken again to this other area that was kind of a park, and it had all sorts of animals in there from a prehistoric era, an area that I believe it was before the last cataclysm or the last ice age. There, you could hear the animals in the background. At one point, when we were close to being done, some sort of a loud cat or lion type creature roared. I could feel it in my chest. It startled me at least. And in the middle of that room was a giant obelisk that was very withered. It looked very ancient. And directly above it, towards the top of the cavern, was this giant plasma ball that was putting off the full spectrum of light that our sun does. And during this time when I had just delivered this information, and David Wilcock got that real shocked look on his face I've seen a million times now, and dug around and pulled out a file and then displayed it to all of us at Cosmic Disclosure. And it was his current book cover. The Saturn in the background, a giant glass obelisk with the sun above it, a plasma ball above it. It was a really weird correlation. My trip there ended with me being brought to the libraries. When I arrived there, completely different look. Everything, all the stone was white and polished marble. And when I first arrived, there was a large, skinny gold arm sticking out of the ceiling holding a crystal ball. And when I told David this, he remembered a story about a pyramid that was found in Bimini underwater, and there was a hand holding a crystal, and the guy pried it out. I guess that reminded him of that story. Now, when we walked through the library, we would see these very old rolled up scrolls. We were seeing tablets and different weird looking books that were bound by like plant material and leather, all the way up to the end where I was seeing books that you could have ordered off of Amazon.com a week before. They had the ISBN numbers on them. It was amazing. So they keep abreast of all of everything. They have full access to the internet. It was down there that Ari was telling me that there's a lot of information that has been out there, and a lot of it about the Anunnaki and all of that is fairly accurate, but that the information very early on had been co-opted by this, Illuminati type faction that wanted to make their religion our religion, so they tried to skew some of the information. Apparently, to these raptor type beings, they had lost access to one of their crystal caverns that had a lot of information that was very important to them, and they wanted access to that information. And Kari had heard that as a adolescent, I had been brought down there to interface with the crystals. That was one of the big reasons they wanted to interface with me, is to try to see what kind of information they were able to glean. They had one of these old crystals, and they had it in this chamber that they were trying to regrow it somehow. Kari she had told me that she wanted to experience the memory I had of connecting with the crystals. I was kind of leery about it. I didn't know who she was. She was wanting to do something that is very personal. And she could tell I had intrepidation, and she walked over to a wall, turned around, and then she had this drink that she called the elixir of Isis that would calm me down and put me in a state to where I could communicate with her better, and I turned it down. At that point, we sat down and leaned across each other and had our elbows on our knees and held hands. And at that moment, I felt as though I was pulled outside of my body towards the middle of where we were, and there was some sort of, I don't know, it's like a whirlwind going on, and I started seeing all these flashes of her life. And as she was going through my life, trying to get to the point to where she could experience that experience, I was seeing those time periods in her life too. But a lot of what I was seeing, I wasn't able to interpret because I have such a different experience than she does. But there was an experience to where she was upset extremely that one of her childhood friends had been killed in an incursion with these raptor type beings. There were a few things like that, and that's when I was able to glean from her that she is a priestess set aside to be holy, that she has never engaged in sex or any of that. She was totally put aside just for what she was doing. And after I had that experience with her, my wife would walk in for months, and I would just be sitting there staring at the wall, thinking about all of the conversations we've had. And very little of the conversation that we had in the library and the information we exchanged in this mind meld have I really recorded. I'm still processing a lot of it, and I hope to get it out at some point. But it affected me profoundly. After that, it was very soon after that, I found myself having to get on the high vibratory diet. I was eating corn dogs. I was 268 pounds. And I guess people that saw the show, you saw how quickly this transformation happened. It was almost bizarre. People at Gaia, when I would show up each time, I was so much different. They had problems processing it. A lot of people out in the community are convinced that I've been replaced by a clone. A skinnier clone, yeah. Now the Anshar, they let me know that for millennia, they have been reaching out and interfacing with human beings and helping them channel information that is spiritually enlightening and also information that is scientific that will help us through certain periods. When I walked through this library area where all these people were kicked back in these egg-shaped chairs, it was, I don't know, it's surreal. You're walking, you see all these people kicked back, kind of like in meditation mode. A lot of people would love to see that here. But that's when it was explained to me that they reach out, they'll reach out, and a person usually will tell them who they're going to be in the session. Like a person will be there, and they'll come to them, and they'll be like, "Oh, are you blah, 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 blah," from their belief system? And usually they'll be like, "Okay, it's a positive figure. Sure, we'll roll with it." And then they start giving this positive spiritual information or technical information. And not just this group are reaching out. We're in telepathic communication with a lot of different beings, and a lot of them are these like archangel and beings that are in another realm, not physically with us. The Anshar brought me on 2 different occasions down to Antarctica. The first time was just for what they called a reconnaissance flight. They wanted to get this information to the SSP Alliance and a few other people, and so they pretty much just brought me along for the ride. This is the vessel we were on. Gonzalez called it a bus because I guess when you walk in, it's seated very similar to a bus, and it looks kind of like a bus. So he was calling it the Anshar bus. Now, one of the interesting things I was shown is that directly below Antarctica, there is a huge kind of a cavern system that goes in under the water, and then it runs into the rift system that runs under the ice the Ross Ice Shelf, and runs up through under the ocean in a rift system that runs all the way up to North America. The military-industrial complex have been exploiting those areas for many, many years. We've developed these giant black submarines that are electromagnetically propulsed, but they're the size of container ships. They're huge. They actually load with, I saw them unloading, but they will load with cranes, giant container ships, just like you will see in any harbor around here. And then they take them under the ground in the water down to various places in South America and ultimately Antarctica. And a lot of the area they travel through are areas that were, created between rift systems by the ancient Goode race. They're very ancient underwater tunnel systems. As we were flown in, once I really realized that there was an industrial area under the ice, I learned that they told me not to get lost in the telemetry or the information because the craft we were on was very intuitive. If I would wonder about something, all of a sudden all this data would come up about it. And the experience was happening so quickly, if I would look at the data, I would miss a whole lot of other. So she was telling me the data is being captured, it will be sent to the proper people. Just focus on looking out the window, basically. It wasn't a window, but. And one of the things we saw was a giant in the middle of this sprawling industrial area, obviously built by humans. They had a huge power plant that was, it created power from geothermal. It went into the ground, and the geothermal heat allowed them to create steam, which works a lot like like nuclear power here that we use. There were large buildings and structures. Like I said, mostly what was above ground there looked like military type base and industrial, like they were building something and excavating something. I wasn't quite sure. A lot of the steam plumes were coming up from pools of water. The water was so hot that it was steaming that was coming out. And come to find out, that's what's creating a lot of these ice caverns, is the geothermal heat coming up. And it's increasing. The geothermal heat is getting more and more active down there. It's raising the entire temperature of the ice shelf by like 1 degree every couple years, which is enough to cause a massive melt at some time in the future if it keeps occurring at that rate. The excavation that we're doing underneath the ice is further destabilizing the ice. And it's a problem right now. It could cause some serious issues if a giant shelf broke off and fell in the water. It could cause tsunamis. And they're doing most of their excavating with steam, pressurized steam, to clear out areas where they are finding ancient palm trees, ancient structures, mastodons, woolly mammoth type creatures. They're finding them everywhere. They were flash frozen. After that trip, I returned back to the inner Earth hangar area through this blue swirling vortex that was just above the water. That's where I've gone in and out of it several times now. One of the groups that I didn't know about until Ari told me about them was a group called the Banished. This is a group that is made up of people that have been kicked out of inner Earth societies over millennia because they didn't want to live by the rules. A lot of them, it turns out, just fell in love with surface humanity. Even though we're going through these wild, crazy times and we're mostly misbehaving, something about us enamored them, and they came out and wanted to live amongst us and help us grow, but at the same time, they have service to self type agendas as well. So they're not seen as positive, more neutral. my first encounter with the Banished, I was actually down at Long Island on our trip last year, family trip. I was laying in the bed, and my son was in the bed next to me, and then there was another queen-size bed in the hotel where my wife and daughter were laying. And I woke up, and I see a woman's head above me, and she's looking this way, and then she looks down and realizes I'm awake and looks surprised, and then she reaches down and just touches me like that real quick, and then it was over. It was disconcerting to me because my family was in the room. And afterwards, I was having a lot of really weird dreams, thoughts that I don't normally have, very bizarre thoughts and feelings. And as I started to find out more about these people, I started to find out that they tend to seek people in positions of power. They try to intermarry into rich families or powerful families, and that they were having children with these regular human beings. Now, it was probably about 6 weeks. I was having all of these bad dreams, weird thoughts, I just wasn't myself. And I had met with Kari a few times during that time period. Finally, I was pulled down in the middle of the night, white flash teleportation, and she guided me to this room that had a table on it, where she told me that this banished person named Mara had infected me somehow with entity attachments, and that these entity attachments were being used to keep tabs on me and also to get information or intelligence about what was going on with the Anshar. She had me lay down, and she pulls out this real long crystal and starts waving it over me. And it's making noises kind of like how crystal glasses with water in them, you rub your finger around them, they make kind of a singing noise. It was making these different noises, and then all of a sudden I started seeing these shadows darting away. So, they were removed. I was glad they were removed, but I wasn't very happy that they were there to begin with. I asked her why she hadn't removed them in our prior meetings, or at least told me about them. And she stated that they had to wait till they had tried to attach to my energy vortexes, but just before they completely attached to remove them. The most recent trip, I was taken down where Gonzalez was already waiting for me, and we were brought down to this different hangar. And this is the time when we got in one of these egg-shaped craft, and they just started flying us through the walls and over the city. I got to see that scene that you saw flying over the city and before we flew through another wall. We went up through a blue swirl, came out of the ocean basically in a blue swirl, and darted very quickly and got to where we were going in Antarctica. They didn't slow down. They headed straight for a wall, just like they would do in the inner Earth, in the caverns. We went right through the ice. We ended up in a very similar area I'd been to before, a big giant cavern of ice, where about a football field or two away were a bunch of people steaming the ground, digging, and they didn't notice us. I don't know if we were cloaked or not. So Kari was with us, and two of the real tall Asian-looking inner Earth beings with the crystals on their head, on their forehead. And then Gonzalez and I, and they had us put on these real fine mesh, almost like chain of mail suits. We would put them on, put the boots on, and they would just come together, just mesh together like one piece. And then they had us put on this thing that you put your head in through the front. And it was kind of like fencing mast, and it sealed up behind us, and then a screen lit up and you could see everything going on around you. It was really amazing. We could see all these bodies that were lined up pretty close to the snowbank that were of all different types. There were some of these, what I've described as the pre-Adamite types with the large skull, 12 to 14 foot tall. And it looked like the bodies had been through something incredible. Some of their arms were stretched out and wrapped around their torsos. They were pretty beat up. And there were different types of humans that were there too. Gonzalez had with him a special core sample kind of tool that we were using to push into these frozen dead bodies to get genetic samples. He was also taking some sort of images as he was taking the sample. One of the ones that I did a sample from was, there was a probably a little bit shorter than 5 foot tall being that was curled up, much like this. And they had a tail that was sticking out, kind of out and frozen. I could see the folds where the tail connects to the back. There were these weird, like, kind of folds of skin. And I had to stick the probe in there and get a genetic sample out for them. But was one of the interesting things is that people in those programs, they were calling this a Pompeii on ice because of the way these bodies were discovered. They were discovered in a very eerie, similar way to Pompeii. These were, the one on the right is one of these original pre-Adamite type beings, and they had the long, elongated skulls, kind of the fatty pockets on their chests, kind of a pot belly as well, and very wide hips, very interesting wide hips. And of course, many of y'all have seen that with the ancient Egyptian depictions of some of the pharaohs. Akhenaten and some of them that were depicted with strange physiology. And some of these elongated skull beings that ended up ruling Egypt and other places were survivors or remnants after the last cataclysm that happened. These, I guess, for lack of a better word, these Atlanteans were stranded in little enclaves all over the planet. They no longer had access to their technologies, or most of their technologies, or each other. They were separated and really didn't begin to talk with each other again. There was two different groups. One group was Europe, Africa area, and another group was here in the Americas. And until after the time of Columbus, they were not able to really interact with each other. And there seems that there is a long-standing competition or feud between the two groups, as it is. These images really show, I guess, the strange bodies that they have, the pockets of fat on the belly, and the real wide hips and narrow waist. It's striking. Back to the bodies we were looking at. We were then shown that there was a little bit of stonework sticking out of the snowbank we were next to. So, without missing a stride, Kari and the two other Inner Earth people just walked through it as if it wasn't there. And Gonzalez looked at me, I looked at him, and we followed them. And when we got inside, the room was lit, and it was a library. There were all different types of scrolls around, very large, looked like someone with large hands, a large being, was using it. And on the wall there was a bowl, and there was a little bit different than this image that was depicted. There was 3 rings with a arrow stuck in the middle of it, almost like a target. The two Asian-looking inner Earth people walked directly up to one of these trays and started loading metal scrolls into this collapsible crate that they had with them. And it was crinkling. It sounded a little bit like tin, but I was able to see one of them that had flopped open a little bit, and it looked like laser-etched symbols, all in it, laser-etched symbols. And to this day, I still don't know what type of intel or information it was, but obviously they wanted to remove it before that area was excavated. So, how is all this information really important to us? Our consciousness is expanding at a huge rate right now. Finding out more information about these inner Earth groups that have been so tied to us in our journey here on planet over millennia will help us understand our history, but also a lot of the information that we're looking at. So much of it has been turned into different belief systems or religions that, people will sit there and regurgitate information in a way that they give other belief systems, crap for. We'll give people crap for being so much of a fundamentalist when we're the same way with our belief systems. What will help is if we start to open our minds a little bit to other information and realize that, if we can look at this information with different eyes, we may get even more useful information out of it. Different perspective at looking at it and looking at ourselves. Of course, I have to talk about the graphic novel. Interestingly enough, when I was conversing with Tier Air, stated that all this is really great work. We're planting information to the seeds of consciousness, but they wanted not only me, but all other light workers out there to find a way to not just be preaching to the choir. The people I'm talking to here, you already have a propensity to believe some of this stuff, or believe a version of it. We need to get this information out through our different talents, different ways of art, music, different types of media. And I don't want people to feel like they have to just spread the blue avian message or this information, but I think everyone right now is being pushed to spread this positive information, loving information in a way that will kick in the 100th monkey effect on a larger scale. More and more people they won't know why, they'll want to be more positive. Basically, I was told to do this and get this information to the gaming people, the sci-fi people, that their consciousness is already primed for a lot of this information, but they see it as entertainment purposes only. But if you can get a message into them, why not? So I think that's what we're going to start seeing. A lot of people that do what we do, people with the arts, music, you're going to find people being compelled to spread this blue avian type message of being more loving, forgiving yourself, being service to others, and trying to change the world one person at a time.
What is their message?
Their message for humanity is that we need to become more loving, we need to become forgiving of ourselves and forgiving of others. We need to focus on becoming more service to others on a daily basis. And we need to focus on raising our vibration and our consciousness.